Welcome to Leadership in Education, Culturally Responsive Art in Education. My name is Charles Brown, and I'm the Director of Equity and Access for Riverside County Office of Education. I believe that it's up to every leader to work with their educational partners to create the environments where our students are successful, regardless of their external, internal, social, cultural context. I want to read this quote. Through education comes understanding, and through understanding comes true appreciation. All children are artists. The problem is how to remain an artist once he or she grows up. And so through this presentation, the goal is that we deepen our understanding of culturally responsive teaching from an equity-minded lens. And we want to gain a more comprehensive strategy for applying culturally responsive teaching within our classrooms. And so to further support our understanding in regards to culturally responsive pedagogy, we'd love to share with you this quote from Knight, which says, school colleagues and departments of education have a moral and ethical responsibility to prepare teachers to be culturally responsive, to enable teachers to respond to educational needs of their diverse student population. And so to accompany Knight's view in regards to culturally responsive pedagogy, we also have a definition in regards to culturally responsive teaching from Zaretta Hammond, which says, cultural responsiveness is not a practice. It informs our teaching so we make better choices for eliciting, igniting, motivating, and supporting and expanding the intellectual capacity of all students. And so with that being said, we want to look at two perspectives in terms of looking at this. We're going to look at surface culture and deepening our understanding in regards to culture. So with surface culture, we want you to think about your experience in school and what practices did you participate in school? What was the role of the teacher? And then what was the role of the other students? How did you demonstrate respect in the classroom? And what made you feel more comfortable in that particular class? What were some of the type of rewards that you earned? And how did you feel in terms of receiving consequences for your particular actions? So that's that kind of surface things that happen that kind of guided. But let's take a deeper cultural perspective in regards to that, looking deeper. Consider our students' current needs through a culturally responsive lens at that. So what do you believe every student deserves when they enter into their classroom? How can you communicate your students your commitment to supporting their learning experiences in that classroom? And then what other supports might you need to design the learning experience in order to help them to be successful in that classroom? So to help you to do that, what we want you to do is to kind of reflect on these three questions. One, what do you believe every student deserves when they enter into their classroom? How can you communicate to your students your values about their learning experiences? And then lastly, are you interested in maximizing learning through supporting each student to demonstrate their knowledge through multiple ways? And so with that, the action steps that you will follow is look at creating entry points in order to provide multiple opportunities for your students to learn. We want you to make sure that you include some of their learning experiences so that you can integrate that into classroom discussion and other learning content as you continue to deliver that instruction. And then lastly, create some flexible grouping structures, which will allow your scholars to be able to articulate their lived experiences and share in regards to some of the things that you've designed within your classroom. So research shows when a person values something, they will take time to reflect on it. So just some things to kind of help you to kind of look at your own experiences and think about what motivates you. Consider what shapes our view about ourselves and others. And then lastly, what teaching strategies would better suit in order to help our students in regards to their learning, and then creating positive models for them to kind of reflect on. So when we look at us as a culture, research reveals Western European cultures are more individualistic. And so what we realize is that individuals from Asia, Africa, Central South America, and Middle Eastern cultures are more collectivist. And so when we talk about collectivists, we know that they like to work together frequently in order to support their learning. And then Hammonds also says that communication and discussion are valuable parts of the learning process. So us as educators want to make sure that we incorporate that into what we do in order to better support our scholars in being successful. And so how might culture guide how our brain processes information or organizes it? We talk about the integration of music and story and repetition into our lesson. And then we also talk about how cultures have readily oral narratives to support that learning, call and response, and attention-grabbing strategies to signal the importance of that content. And so what we know about the brain is that the brain does certain things in order to store that information. So we store memories differently depending on how we experience them. When you talk about getting too much information, we notice flaws in others, then we notice them in ourselves. When we talk about need to act, we need to stay focused because we favor the immediate relatable things that are right in front of us. To avoid mistakes, we are motivated to preserve our autonomy and status as irreversible decisions. And when we don't have enough information, sometimes we fill in those characteristics with stereotypes, generalizations, or prior history just to make sense of it all. And so what research shows is that all new information must be connected to existing knowledge in order to be learned. And so what we want to do is be able to connect previous knowledge to the new learning. We want the brain to be able to grow and stretch depending upon the complexity of the problem that we're trying to solve. And then lastly, we want to make sure that we're utilizing repetition and call and response and flexible grouping learning strategies to support students from a collective culture to make those neurological connections and help to build that schema. So again, it just further confirms for us that in terms of teaching art as an advantage, we want to make sure that that music is involved, that we're utilizing those stories, that we're integrating students' home and cultural experiences into our classroom projects, and that teachers are building those necessary relationships with their students in order to have a greater impact in regards to learning. Facts in culture that we know about the brain is designed to minimize social threats and maximize opportunities to connect with others. So we also know that when scholars make those positive relationships with their brain safety, that in terms of the situation, they're able to be their authentic self in the classroom and be able to contribute to that learning because of those relationships that are established. And so what John Hattie says is that teacher plus student relationship equals student growth. So therefore, we know that when teachers build those positive relationships with students, students are more likely to have a above average effect on student performance. And so we want to make sure that that's happening consistently in the classroom so that our scholars are able to grow and mature in the way that we would want them to. And so teachers who have developed those positive relationships with students are viewed trustworthy. This safe stimulates the brain to release the oxytocin, which will help them to be the scholar that they need to be. So students who have positive relationship with their teachers, they attend class more regularly, they're persistent in regards to getting their work done, and they have a high level of care and respect for their teachers in the classroom. And so providing students with that validation, encouraging them, you can complete assignments and positively reframe when they make mistakes. And so with that being said, we want to make sure that, again, we're making those connections, we're doing what's necessary to show that those relationships are established, which helps our scholars to, again, do the things to make sure that that space that we're providing the instruction is having those effects on them in the classroom. And so we want to utilize Knight's framework in regards to utilizing teaching in art. And we're going to talk about some levels in order to see how we can go deeper in our art connection. And so we're going to use the experience of Heroes and Holidays when discussing Frida Kahlo. So we know that she was a Mexican painter, known for many of her portraits, worked to inspired by nature and artifacts of Mexico. We realize that in terms of it, that she worked to celebrate international and highlight indigenous traditions, and that she was the wife of Diego Rivera, who was a prominent Mexican painter, and his large murals helped establish a mural movement in Mexico and in international art. What we also want to do is look at level 2, which goes to the adaptive approach in regards to connection and concept. And so at the age of 6, Kahlo contracted polio. A long recovery isolated her from other children, and over time, she walked with a limp. In her effort to catch up, Kahlo attended a private school in Germany, where she spoke Spanish as her first language, which posed problem for her, being in school. And during the Mexican Revolution, she was one of 35 students to admit into a national prep school where she increased her interest in Mexican culture and developed in her political voice. So we want to be able to show our scholars that just by going deeper into their study about a particular art character can really support in regards to them deepening their connection and in regards to their articulation, in regards to their experiences with the subject that we're discussing. And so with Frida Kahlo, she crossed boundaries within class of Mexican culture. There was an elite culture, a professional culture, and a working class culture of Mexicans from rural areas who were illiterate but held sacred traditions. We also know that Kahlo bridged levels of class and layers of cultural experiences. She challenged the traditional ways women were viewed during her lifetime. So we can see that with each level, it goes deeper and deeper in terms of making those connections with our artists, that our scholars can resonate their experiences with them. And then with level 4, we look at a social action. Students explore artists' lived experiences. So again, looking at our character, Frida Kahlo, at the age of 18, Kahlo was in a devastating trolley accident that left her with serious injuries, which significantly impacted the rest of her life. Out of 140 paintings, 55 of those were self-portraits. She wanted to help give women a voice. And then lastly, what I want to share is that she critiqued the US for the oppressive nature of American capitalism and imperialism that favored the wealthy class and kept down the working class. She protested against US interventions in Guatemala. And so our scholars can see that just by taking a few pieces of art, they can dive in deeper into the content, make those connections, and be able to share their lived experience to the experience of our authors or our individuals that we're selecting to utilize in our art projects. And so a sample lesson could be facilitating collaborative learning groups of 3 to 4 students by you just distributing some of the art so that our scholars can make those connections to, with some sentence frames to kind of support the discussion. We also want to look at in regards to guided discussions, having the scholars identify what are the elements of Kahlo's culture that were highlighted, and in what ways does Kahlo's cross culture and or class boundaries? And then lastly, what indigenous artistic influences are found in her work and how does she represent this? And so what we hope is that through this presentation, you will use a 3-2-1 reflection to just kind of think about what are 3 things that I've learned in this professional learning series? What are 2 areas you would like to learn more about? And is there one culture responsive practice that was identified that you would like to try on in your classroom? And so again, I want to say thank you for your leadership and what you do in our districts, our schools, and in our counties to support art education throughout our particular districts. And we want to remind you as a socially conscious leader, we want you to remember that you serve, you inspire, and you empower those through your own examples. They explore their own intersecting identities, analyzing their mindsets, and hone their skills. They seek to create equity-centered, asset-based systems by implementing and sustaining positive change that benefits those they serve. They focus their efforts on creating equitable access and consistently strong outcomes for all students, paying special attention to the needs of historically marginalized populations. And so I just want to encourage you to continue doing the work of equity to support our young people as they continue to grow and develop or matriculate through the various grade levels. And we hope that art continues to be a main focus at our school sites.